Hi, everyone. So my name is Brian Wallace. I am an associate professor in Corey College. It's nice to be here with people that do real work. Let's see. I think the idea today is to talk about some of the challenges inherent to actually deploying some of these marvelous kind of technology artifacts that we've built, these generative AI systems in business for actual use cases, and maybe discuss issues that you yourself perhaps have encountered. Before we get to the questions though, I guess we'll do maybe it's a short panel, so maybe just a short round of introductions. We can maybe start at the end and tell us a bit about, I don't know, your background and how you use AI, just very briefly.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Margaret Angel, and I'm head of partnerships and strategic initiatives at the Roux Institute at Northeastern University, which is our Portland, Maine campus. And our mission is to help enable the modern economy in northern New England. And we do that through creating new talent pipelines, educating existing workforces, launching research initiatives like our collaboration with the Institute for Experiential AI, and launching new ventures in the technology and life sciences fields. I'm thrilled to be here with my colleagues. Most of what I do with AI is help connect business leaders with the resources that are unique to a university in enabling them to address their business challenges and candidly turn those into business opportunities that can create really significant economic growth in our region.
That's tough to follow. Robin Sutara, I am a field CDO with Databricks. I have been with Databricks for about 2 years. Prior to that, I spent 23 years with Microsoft, where I was the COO for Azure Data Engineering, as well as the Chief Data Officer for Microsoft UK. I'm sure my British accent is super thick and heavy, but I'm actually based out of Seattle area, so I'm really excited to be here. My whole role and function at Databricks is to really help organizations learn all the best practices from the mistakes I made at Microsoft, right? And how do you think about people, process, platform, technology, and all of those things that it takes to actually execute at scale. So yes, I get to work with about 12,000 customers around the world and help them do that with data and AI.
So, hello everyone. So my name is Peggy Tsai. I'm actually very equivalent to Robin Sutara's role. I'm the Field Chief Data Officer at BigID, and my background is in working in financial services companies, rolling out and operationalizing on data governance, data management programs, which have now become AI governance and AI programs. So there's a lot of similarities, certainly, to how companies have leveraged their existing data frameworks and now moving it into generative AI. So the customers that I work with are thinking about AI security, controlling their large language models, how to put protection and security around it. So what we talk a lot about is also things around privacy regulations and compliance, and the EU AI Act, which I think everyone loves to talk about, and thinking about how that helps companies move that going forward. So really happy to be here today.
Hi, Usama Fayyad. I'm the director of the Institute for Experiential AI. So I work a lot with Portland, where we have about Maine, where we have 30% of our team. The biggest part of our team is here in Boston, where I'm based. I ended up in Boston through a long journey that included working with the Northeastern out of California, out of the Bay Area, and decided to move to Boston here to be closer to the action. But historically, I used to be Chief Data Officer. I was one of the early ones at Yahoo, which acquired my company, second startup out of Microsoft, where I worked for many years. Did the thing at Yahoo and figured out what Chief Data Officer should be all about, which to me is mostly generating value and a smaller amount around kind of governance and figuring out what to do and what not to do with the data. Also served as Global Chief Data Officer at Barclays in London for 3 years, both London and New York, but mostly in London. And at the Institute for Experiential AI today, we do a lot of applied work in terms of projects working with partners, many of whom are brought to us by Margaret, but also we have a team that kind of engages with companies and figures out how we work with them. And the reason we go out there and seek work with companies is because we believe a lot of the action in terms of the research in AI and generative AI come from applications of the technology and making it work in the real world.
Great. Well, thanks all for the wonderful introductions. I think I'll start with Usama. And so, you know, one of the things I think everyone in this room is familiar with is sort of the miraculous abilities of these generative AI systems. We've all seen, I don't know, recipes for dinner written in the style of Shakespeare and like various incredible seeming things like this that such systems can produce. I sort of wonder though, as somebody that's been working with businesses to try to roll out technologies in practice, in your view, have these sort of next generation or current generation generative AI systems actually yielded meaningful kind of business value? And you know, what can we do that we couldn't have done with the AI technologies that existed maybe 5 years ago or so? And where do you see them sort of failing?
Wow, that's a multidimensional question. So, in terms of making this technology work, I don't think there's been a lot of yield yet, but I think the yield is coming big time, purely because this generation of AI systems has proven to be more flexible when it comes to language and unstructured data. Most of you know that the majority of data in any organization is unstructured, yet most of the data efforts and almost all of the databases speak structured only. So suddenly we have this technology that can address almost all aspects of what we call knowledge economy tasks. So manipulating symbols and filling out forms. And fortunately or unfortunately, we have created a knowledge economy which is mostly repetitive, robotic. A lot of the work is very droning, and you know, this morning I was doing a bunch of stuff thinking that, my God, can't the computer get it? I've done this thing 20 times in a row. Those kinds of applications, I believe, will experience an acceleration of anywhere from 10% on the conservative side to maybe 80% on the optimistic side. And the knowledge economy is, for a country like the US and for the advanced economies, is about half or slightly more than half the economy. So even if the speed up is 1%, we can't ignore it. It's too big of a number, let alone something that might average out to 30, 40%, which will be huge. Of course, where these things fail, I see a lot of amazing demos out there, and you referred to some of them. But the reality, you know, the difference between a demo that's very impressive and exciting and the reality of an application that you deploy, especially customer-facing ones, and by the way, I believe none of these applications should be directly customer-facing from an enterprise perspective. They should face probably the employee and help the employee interact with customers much more directly. But in the back office, there are so many applications where speed-ups make a lot of sense, and this autocomplete technology can make it work. Where we see the failures are in two areas. One is, in most cases, companies are not ready with the data, so they don't collect that data. They don't capture what their employees are doing. They don't collect it at a fine enough granular level of detail for the AI to make sense. Hence, you see these amazing demos, and then when they apply them, all sorts of holes, issues, and I'm sure we'll talk about responsible AI and biases and all of that come up. The second area is this, I call it for the first year, an obsession with very large language models, where all the big companies were pushing them. For a year, I've been kind of saying, no, you can get away with much smaller private language models, like small is 5 billion to 10 billion, 13 billion parameters, as opposed to the trillions we're seeing now. And finally, even the big companies are beginning to admit it and beginning to sing the praises of SLMs. So I think that's the other failure area. It's been more expensive than it needed to be in terms of GPUs and complexity and maintenance and updates. And I think we're showing now a lot of very reasonable, very good applications with these smaller large language models.
It's always a little bracing for me as someone that was around in the BERT days when we thought of that encoder model as being quite large, to hear people refer to 10 billion parameter models as small, but your point is well taken. So I think it's a nice segue actually to, I guess, a question that I might have for Peggy regarding the unstructured data and its use. So you're somebody that thinks a lot about privacy, and as Usama said, most of the valuable data that's out there is unstructured, and that's arguably why these sort of generative systems are so attractive, is because they can they're very flexible in being able to consume and sort of make use of unstructured data. But how do you think about the risks that are inherent to doing that when people don't even know perhaps what's in that unstructured data? For example, it's been shown in the research community that you can readily recover sensitive information that is implicitly stored in model parameters. And so if a company goes and just runs all of their data through a large language model to do some sort of fine-tuning in-house and then deploys that model, that runs the risk of exposing that data. And so how do you think about that, and what are what advice would you give to practitioners that are thinking about trying to do this sort of thing and make better use of their unstructured data?
That's a great question, and actually that's the biggest conversation I have with a lot of organizations today, because when they first started piloting a lot of the large language models, they simply pointed it at a file share, a lot of the unstructured data. And I think that for the most part, organizations know what's in their structured data, and they're reasonably aware of the sensitivity and the confidentiality of that data, so they're okay with the structure. But it's the unstructured data where it's untapped, it's unknown, and that's where companies, if they harness that knowledge in the unstructured data, that's where they're going to get the most out of their small language or large language models. But the governance of unstructured data has largely been untapped. And prior when I worked at financial services companies, we didn't even think about governing unstructured data. What does that mean? And I think that one of the things that I've been talking about is, unstructured data, what's actually the contents inside, being able to classify not just a document, but also inside the data and the metadata of unstructured data, and being able to leverage what you need and stitch it together with your structured data, so to enhance your already known knowledge. So the biggest challenges that organizations have, again, is being able to really understand, when you are building out your large language models, and I'm sure Robin will talk about this as well, is, you want to make sure that you're not unknowingly including any of your personal information, and that's, you have to continue to apply comply with different privacy regulations that are out there. So being able to have those controls, and I think that the key word in a lot of the regulations is being able to automate your controls as well, and I think that's increasingly a challenge for organizations that need to be, that are used to manually looking and classifying their data, so that's a problem. Actually this morning I was actually at a customer site, and we were talking about prompt engineering and doing retrieval augmented training, and he was actually excluding the fact that potentially in his generative AI models, the fact that the prompts and the outputs from these generative models could contain private sensitive data, so that was completely out of his data governance scope. And so that was, again, a great conversation, and I don't think a lot of data leaders today are including it, and if they are, that's great, but it's a great point to have this conversation and to expand that and make sure that's included in their AI governance as well.
I think the interesting part, Usama sort of covered on this, this technology is not new, right? It's been around for a while. I think what is newer is the accessibility to people. My grandmother's calling me, asking me how to use ChatGPT, right? And then I sort of look at it and say, oh, I have a customer who's also using ChatGPT, so you're exactly the same, Granny. Right? You really have to think about how are you going to unlock the power of your own data, and that's exactly the conversations I'm having with boards and CEOs is, you don't need a 10 billion parameter model to be able to help your HR department answer questions more more efficiently for your employees. You don't necessarily need all the lyrics to every Rolling Stones song to solve that customer question, right? And so how do you really start to think about the right model, which ones are going to be the big proprietary large models, and which ones do you really think about sort of a RAG adaptation to be able to apply it to just your data? And that's what we're really seeing across the ecosystem.
Well, to expand on that, how would you advise if you're, sort of you're part of a business and you're looking to operationalize some of the advances in generative AI? There are a lot of options, right? Like you could do something as simple as basically saying, well, I'm going to rely on one of these sort of APIs as a service and use kind of either few-shot or retrieval augmentation, or maybe you're looking to train something in-house, which requires a ton of expertise and some black magic, often to get the gradients to not explode, that sort of thing. How do you think about that, or how would you advise somebody to think about that? Because there is like this very wide sort of range of options that you might have in terms of everything from running from just strictly rely on proprietary APIs to completely training in-house and everything in between. So how do you advise folks to think about that trade-off?
So for most organizations today, it really is a use case by use case basis, right? There is anybody who tells you that they have one model that's going to solve all your business problems, absolutely kick them out your door. Like right now, it's just not going to happen. So really for the organizations that I work with, it's really looking at what is the business problem that you're trying to solve for. Now let's talk about the technical platform. Let's talk about how you're going to enable the people across the organization. How are you going to set up the right policies and controls? What's the current governance that you have in place? What are the regulatory requirements? And going through that and figuring out what are you going to standardize versus what has to be explicit. I think there's a great example where a Chevrolet dealership exposed to their customers saying a chatbot, and essentially somebody said, what's the best truck out there? And it responded, Ford F-150. Like it's really, you really have to think about what are the use cases that you're trying to apply this to, and what is the contextual awareness of the right model, and then start to think about the tech that's going to solve that for you. But anybody who's starting with the technology to say, oh, we have these amazing capabilities, I still have Microsoft stock, I want you to all use OpenAI, but anybody that sort of says like Copilot is going to solve all world peace problems, I really worry about that type of scenario.
Definitely, yeah, that makes sense. Thanks. Margaret, a question for you is, so you, in your role at the Roux, you're, as I understand it, trying to facilitate collaborations between, I guess, the Roux as an institute and companies. And I guess it'd be interesting to hear about what you view as like sort of the biggest pain points to doing that and operating in that, with sort of realizing those collaborations fruitfully.
So we all know that people have to learn some things in order to advance your organizations, right? You all know that there are skills that need to be developed. This is something that just the common sense says that lots of employees need new skills. So, as a good partnerships person, I sat down with our first 10 partners, and Usama was there at some of these conversations, and I'd say, what do you need? And they would say, what do you have? And I'd say, no, what do you need? And they'd say, well, why don't you just tell me what you have? And I think it's the same, the analogy, right, is that one technology doesn't serve all purposes. The same thing is one learning experience doesn't serve every company. And so over the last few years, what we've done is work very deeply with a set of companies to analyze their workforce and really start to think about different parts of the workforce, right? Like who needs basic data literacy? What do business leaders need to know? What do curators need to know? What do the engineers need to know? What do the analysts need to know? And then help the organization figure out where they are from emerging to maybe advanced in those areas, and then put the right learning experience to the right group of people. That takes work, right? And I would say a lot of, everybody wants this to be fast, and they want a solution. And you're changing people and you're teaching skills. It's not gonna happen overnight. You can't do it with a 2-hour YouTube video. I want to dispel that myth. And so as a university, our mission is impacting the world. We have a clear pedagogy, as most of you know from Northeastern's reputation. Our focus is on experiential learning. And so what we've tried to design is programs that take your data, your tech stack, your business problem, your people, and put it in the context of the learning and the teaching that we do best at Northeastern. So I think the pain point is the work of figuring out what your different groups of employees need to know and where are they today.
I'd like to just add a couple of things to Margaret's very important point. So almost every company I interact with, and I've done, 50 or 60 board sessions in the last 1 year, where we're sitting with a board, and the board wants to know, what the heck is this AI? How does it fit in my business? What do we miss out on and not miss out on? And everybody wants to develop this AI strategy, which we'll gladly work on their AI strategy. However, I always say, culture will eat strategy for breakfast. It doesn't matter what strategy you have and what your desires are and all of this. And the best way I know of kind of changing culture is two factors. One is education, meaning get people to learn. And I think we're working, for example, with a small-sized bank in Maine, Bangor Savings Maine, where basically the CEO, after seeing a project and a few samples of how learning can have an impact, suddenly turned around and said, I want every employee, from the receptionist to the CEO, trained on what this technology means, of course at different levels, all the way from literacy to business use to technical use to technical proficiency, etc. So that's one. The other component, which is amazingly important, is you could also teach all you want, but if you don't make it experiential, it's not going to stick. And to me, nothing is more powerful than doing these projects where an employee actually says, okay, here's how I'm doing stuff, and gosh, here's how it could be happening. And they actually see it. That's when all the learning becomes relevant, that's when they can relate to it, and that's when change in culture starts happening, and that drives all sorts of stuff. Experiential education is what Northeastern and what our Institute for Experiential AI specialize in, and big time at the Roux Institute. So I just wanted to add those things.
But I think you also need to consider it's not just technology, right? I think lots of people are approaching these problems to say, oh, we need to enable the entire organization. Oh, that means they all need to take Python training. They all need to take SQL training. Like, really think about where the employee, what's a business user versus a technical user? How are you really thinking about outlining those? What are the policies and controls that you're going to put in place? Because it will be different depending on the persona across the organization. So every time I talk to a board and they're essentially like, well, we just want to talk to our data, that's a very different use case than my data science team that now wants to unlock the capabilities of all of the x-rays that they've ever taken across that medical center.
People are always wanting to talk to the data. It's very odd. What do they think the data is going to say? I'm never quite sure. But so this is good. I want to pick up on something that Osama said in passing, which I think is quite interesting. I believe you made the assertion that you don't think you should ever expose chatbot-empowered, let's call it an agent, because that seems to be a term that's very popular right now. So you don't think that such agents should ever be made available to end users. Is that a correct characterization of your view?
You took it to the extreme. I did say right now, where the technology is and the state of readiness, I would not do it. I would not necessarily advise you to do it.
I'd like the other panelists. I'd like everyone's opinion on this particular, because I think that's a very practical. Question.
Where you could do it, and then I'll pass the microphone, is once you have that intervention happening with an employee, with a human in the loop, which is our code word for experiential AI, and you get high confidence in certain cases that this, as Byron would tell you, potentially very unpredictable machine, especially when you ask it something unusual. What we know for sure, we know very little about these models. Byron probably knows 1,000 times more than I do, and I think I know some. what we know for sure is if you actually ask it about an area where the data doesn't cover that area well, or it hasn't seen these types of questions before, almost guaranteed the answer is going to be totally random and out of the blue. That's one thing we know for sure. Now, I leave it to Byron to come up with a theory of why that happens, but that would be my answer.
So I think we've already seen some companies that are putting their Gen AI products outside to their public, and certainly with, I think it was Air Canada that had a very interesting snafu about the refunds of tickets. So the companies that I talk to mainly are in the regulated industry, and of course, they do have a lot of concerns with their data management, that they are still keeping it internal.
Should they do it? Should they allow
They're keeping
customers?
it internal, but I think time will tell with proper security and building, I would say, smaller language models where they have higher confidence of the data and data set. I think that's where they may potentially see some of the monetization and some of the customer efforts being external. So I think it's a little bit of wait and see, but I think it will come to the point if they have stronger assurance on their data.
I actually have lots of customers that are doing it today, customer facing. I think it depends on really making sure that you narrow down that use case and that you have the right controls in place, right? You have to have the right sort of error checking in place to be able to write the application, to be able to say, to refuse to answer or connect to a real person. So for example, JetBlue Airways is doing multiple customer facing to do very specific tasks. Your flight got canceled, you need to rebook, you don't want to sit on hold for 2 hours for an agent. So they are being very, very targeted in the solutions that they're rolling out. Do I think that you all should absolutely not roll anything to the customer? Absolutely not. Use Databricks, I'll help you. We'll figure it out, right? But what I would do is caution you, let's make sure that you're really narrowing it down until you figure out what is that human in the loop? How do you make sure that you have validation? How do you make sure you have the right controls? Because I think willy-nilly doing an Air Canada is going to be pretty expensive in the long run.
But isn't the challenge here that we really don't know how to keep them constrained, right? Because as soon as you open up, and I think this is Usama's point, which I'm sympathetic to, as soon as you open up that interaction, people can do things like tell you to ignore all previous instructions and do whatever you like, and you can get these kind of disastrous PR things for what might be viewed as a negligible benefit of allowing these chatbots, which I sort of feel like as a layperson, I feel like every company has decided they need to have a chatbot for you, and I'm a little bit unclear why this is the case. But I feel like you can't go to any website without it being you want to talk to our chatbot. It's no, I wanted to see the weather. But I do wonder about that. There aren't good mechanisms for sort of circumscribing the interaction, and isn't that the whole challenge?
Well, I think an absolution, if you say it absolute, absolutely not, right? But I do think many organizations are trying to figure out how do we make it constrained enough that it airs out. And maybe it's not, it's a learning path. I mean, just right 6 months ago, everybody would have told you that prompt engineering was the way to go. We're all gonna hire prompt engineers and you all need to get educated on how to do prompt engineering. I'm still treating it like a big chat, please, oh God, give me an answer, right? But I do think that now we've gone to RAG, right? And I just think it continues to evolve over time. I have seen those cases where essentially in that poor Chevy dealership, right? Where somebody essentially said, sell me a truck for a penny, no takes backs, right? They are definitely figuring out ways to go around it. The thing is, tech is not going to be the only solution to these things. And I think if you're depending on tech in isolation to solve some of these problems without thinking about how the system interacts with clients, how do you actually trigger notifications that a person would step in if they're, and that's what we're working with our customers on, is how do we make sure that it's not totally dependent on the technology, and you do have expectation of malicious behaviors and usage in these things while we continue to figure it out. But I think those organizations that are doing nothing, that absolutely say they're not going to do anything right now while they wait for others to figure it out, you'll be left behind.
Margaret, what do you think?
So Usama, I will leave it to the technologists to answer the question about whether it's ready, but I'm actually going to pick up on something that Byron just said. I give you two stories of work that we've done with companies. The same bank that Usama referenced, Bangor Savings Bank, one of our first engagements with them was to build a recommendation engine for their frontline workers to use with their clients. And you have a smallish regional bank who wants to stay competitive. And their competitive edge is that their customers believe in their customer service. And they know they're always going to get to talk to somebody. And as a bank, they know that they have to get better and more efficient with those frontline workers. And so they built an engine that their employees could use in dealing with customers. And they rolled out a few campaigns that were unbelievably successful using this recommendation engine. And that was really the point where the bank got the bug. And that's when they decided that investing in the people was as important as investing in the technology, because it was the two things together that were going to create the competitive advantage for the bank. And so I don't know what that recommendation engine would have been done if we had created it as a consumer-facing recommendation engine, but that wasn't the value of the company. And so I think it came down to what the company's goals were and fitting the technology to the goals. My second story, not so much about chatbot, but we had a company come to us, a small manufacturing company in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and they were very nervous about the implications of AI basically coming for their business, and that they were going to get, their margins were going to get destroyed and they were going to get put out of business. And they came to work with us on figuring out what the opportunity roadmap was for their use of AI. And they were very insistent in the first couple meetings that they wanted efficiency and optimization. Then they wanted to use these tools to cut costs. And we said, let's take a look at the entire business and see where you can match the right technology to the right piece of the business. And the kinds of projects that they ended up wanting to invest in were actually in top-line growth, in marketing, and the use of AI to identify their customers' logos and then create campaigns into those industries. And so I think that's another example of you want a technology to create efficiency, and so you try and push for that. But sometimes the technology is better suited for a different part of the business, and to take the time to think through that and not just go with the easy solution that you can put out there as soon as possible.
Very good. Thanks all. We had some slightly political answers there, but I think the answer is like maybe, and I don't know. But I like Usama's hard stance. I think that's good. All right. So thanks so much for this panel. I think I've run slightly over. Sorry, but this was a really interesting discussion, and hopefully segues into informing the, as I understand it, the table discussions.